Hello,
Yeah,
thank you, Taro, for that
yeah,
introduction, and thanks everybody for attending on Zoom and in person in the gallery. Thank you for taking the time to read the books. I know Being in Motion is a big book. It's like 600 pages. Parts of it are kind of technical in the history of philosophy and ontology. But yeah, it kind of ducks in and out, covering a lot of things. I'm glad that there was yeah, something in it that you could take away and use. And I'll try today to talk about some of those things. So I'll start. Let me just share my screen presentation here. This title actually. So I think this is. Oh, let me push play here. Okay, there we go. So the title is actually, I think, what Taru suggested. In her, she said, can you talk about materialist cosmology and the earthbound ethics of expenditure? And I thought, oh, that's a great title. What a great way to put it. So there it is. That's the title of this talk. There's so many things to talk about. We could discuss from Being in Motion and other works related to the philosophy of movement. I'm happy to talk about any of that in the Q&A and discussion afterward. I'm going to try to keep my presentation now to about 45 minutes and talk mostly sort of about this title, about materialist cosmology, a little bit about evolution and climate change, and the ethics, how to sort of orient an ethical response to climate change, but thinking about the whole thing from a really different perspective. One that sort of shocked me, but this is coming out of my book, Theory of the Earth. And this is what I'm going to talk about today is sort of the last couple chapters. So Theory of the Earth is a book that came out, oh, I forget, maybe 2021, last year. And it covers a range of things from a materialist perspective, not a materialist in the sense of particles or substances or anything like that, but from a different interpretation of matter, a different understanding of matter, informed by yeah, experiments in quantum theory. And in any case, we won't get into all of that of definitions of matter and materialism, but I will talk a little bit about that toward the end. So the book covers a discussion of the origins of the universe, the history of the Earth, the origins of life, a theory of evolution, and then the last two chapters of the book are sort of a theory of climate change based on a reinterpretation of understanding of the place of the Earth and the universe, the place of life on Earth, and the role and function of evolution on the planet. In short, I think we've really misunderstood the situation, the situation of climate change, and that's what I want to talk about. It's a shift, a really different reorientation to understanding where we're at right now. A very deep historical understanding. And I think one way to characterize this, so as I was writing this book, I was finding a lot of, I don't know, inspiration. Georges Bataille, this French philosopher, I mean, he's kind of all over the place, but every now and then he just says something that's just absolutely right on. And one of those things is this quote where he says, all that we recognize as truth is necessarily linked to the error represented by the stationary Earth. And
mm,
when I read that, I thought, yeah, that is the problem, isn't it? That we've really, a lot of humans, obviously not all of them, really historically only a small portion of them, but with a lot of power and violence behind them, uh, thought about the Earth as just like this place that we're on, you know, like it's this stationary flat ground that we can sort of do whatever we want on this Earth, like actors on a stage, but then it doesn't actually change the stage or any of the background. We can destroy forests, we can clear cut, we can do all kinds of stuff and exterminate species. And the Earth, I mean, it's so big, it'll just regenerate, it'll just grow back. And this idea that it's this stationary, stable thing, I think for a fair portion of at least Western and Euro-Western history, has guided thinking about geology and about humans' place in the Earth, that the Earth is not something that changes in any fundamental way. And I think Bataille is right, because this translates into, in philosophy, I mean, one of the big projects of philosophy is to understand the foundations of knowledge, right? The foundations from which we understand reality and think about truth and goodness and beauty and whatever. But this whole really kind of geographical, like parochial idea that there is a foundation, that we can somehow know this foundation and it's a stable foundation. I think it's really like a deep kind of story that the Western and European tradition has told itself, because it liked that narrative. It wanted to know everything. It wanted to know the universal laws of nature. It wanted to know things with absolute certainty. And that's related to this same problem of the stationary Earth, that we live in some stable situation, that we can get an objective handle on it. In any case, I really like this quote. But above in the graph here, this is only the last 500 million years of Earth's history. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really not in the scope of Earth's history, and certainly not in cosmic history. And these are temperature fluctuations over the course of the last 500 years. So since the Cambrian explosion, which was a time at which a ton of species really kind of rapidly started multiplying. So you get a huge expansion of specifically animals, but really lots of different living species about 500 million years ago. And you can see that even in that period of time, you get really rapid changes and fluctuations in temperature across the, through the Cambrian and, just consistently. And especially like in that Pleistocene era, you can see these kind of, regular cycles of climactic change. They're not random at all. They come in patterns and rhythms and iterations. This is because the movement of our solar system, right? I mean, the movement of, first of all, our solar system through the Milky Way. We have to remember that our solar system is just spiraling around a certain arm of the Milky Way, and it gets pushed through all kinds of other, debris and, asteroids, and it changes. Its environment is not stable either. The Earth isn't stable, the solar system's not stable, and the Earth's rotation around the sun isn't stable either. It's not just that it's not circular, it's elliptical generally, but it's not precisely elliptical. It's erratic. It changes, and it changes in regular, rhythmic, iterated patterns that are not perfectly regular, if you know what I mean. They're rhythms that are slightly different each time, and those differences over time, specifically 100,000 years at a time, produce patterns of ice age and climactic change. And that's what you can see in those places. But in any case, the point is that we're not dealing with a stable system. We're dealing with much more of a metastable system, a rhythmic system that comes in patterns and waves, and not something that's stable at all. So when we think about what we're doing on this planet, we really need to think about that as the situation we're in, not as a stationary Earth, not as a technical problem of like, oh, the Earth's broken, we broke it, now let's fix it. It's just not, that's like totally the wrong way to think about what we're doing. So you can see in that very last tail end, that's the very tail end of the diagram. There's like a red line there. The print is very tiny. Maybe you can see, but it says Holocene. So this is what I'm calling the Holocene assumption. The Holocene assumption is this kind of just parochial historical moment where, certain groups of humans at a certain point in history started to think about the Earth as stable. A, that's not all humans. B, that's definitely not a good characterization of Earth's history. But it is during the time of the rise of writing, recording, ancient states and empires, this is the kind of thing that they record and think about the Earth as this stable place, just because it has been for a very good portion of human history. Humans have experienced the Earth as relatively stable. Now, why did they experience it as stable? One, I think in a very general way, the Gaia hypothesis is just that you've got a whole bunch of diverse species all releasing gases, incorporating energy, releasing that energy, and through the release of energy, living organisms on the planet end up stabilizing a biosphere, a stable atmospheric temperature situation that's conducive to life. So in other words, life transforms the planet to make it more hospitable to life, and that stabilizes. So I mean, it takes 500 million years to get to a point where you get increasing stability. that has to do with a number of variations of erratic orbits, and as well as animals and creatures releasing gases and transforming the environment to be more hospitable to them and stable. So humans come along pretty late in the scene in all of this, and by the time humans come along, they are feeling like, oh, everything's pretty stable at this place. But that's just an effective history. Okay, that's the Holocene assumption. It's not like we just decided by randomness to think of the Earth as stable, but it's an effect. It's an effect of geohistory, and its effect that you can see played out in sort of ancient. Well, I mean, different ancient cultures, but that's a whole other story of when this transition happens from more chaotic, archaic mythologies to more orderly ones that think about the world as some kind of stable sphere, guided by some, transcendent deity of some kind. That's certainly not universal, is certainly not like geographically or temporally universal that people have told those stories. But you can see the rise of storytelling about unchanging principles that are holding everything together, but they're related to this same kind of assumption about the stability of the Earth. But what happens in the 1960s is the discovery that that the Earth's surface, the crust that we're floating on islands of rock that seem very solid to us, but are in fact granite we think about it as a very hard, heavy rock, but granite relative to many other rocks is actually pretty lightweight. So it floats. And we're just kind of moving around on floating islands that are submerging into lava, coming back up again and being reformed and so on. So plate tectonics in the 1960s was a blow to the idea of a stable geology, to a stable Earth. But it did not overthrow the assumption. Instead, it was sort of replaced with this idea of uniformitarianism. The idea that the Earth, there's change. Okay, fine. It's not totally stable, but it's very slow. The changes are very kind of linear, incremental, slow, uniform. And that has been a guiding idea in geology for a long time. One of the things that's most new and most radical and most, to me, inspiring from the perspective of thinking about geohistory, climate change, and living and moving well on this Earth is the huge amount of nonlinear data that's coming out of, this is very recent, that there's a coordinated effort among countries and scientists around the world to start collecting climatic data, to start drilling into ice cores, to find out what the temperatures were in the past and start to track temperature changes and geological shifts over really long periods of deep history of the Earth. And what we're finding with this data is that these changes are really nonlinear, meaning that uniformitarianism is not a good characterization of what's going on. Not only is the Earth not stable, it's also not a linear system. It's a nonlinear system. And let me say a bit more about what that is in the next slide. So this diagram shows, you can see that the line labeled linear that goes kind of at a very consistent angle, that's like arithmetic, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. It's just additive, right? So something comes and something comes after that and something's added on to that. That's a very linear way to think about any system or any way of doing anything. And so we can, we often make predictions, and historically we have, based on linear models. What we're finding is that the climate, the biogeochemical system is nonlinear, meaning that it only looks, you can see what we observe there, that's the short term, on a very small scale. If you just look at a very short period of time, things look very linear. They look like, oh, things are incrementally changing, they're getting warmer, and we can expect small incremental changes. Actually, if we map this out both longer in the past and longer into the future, we should expect, based on Earth's history, nonlinear changes. That means that the change that comes afterward, it's not 1 + 1. It's a feedback loop in which the thing that happens afterwards has an effect that changes the situation entirely. So there's not a stable background upon which 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. It's that every time you add something to the system is different than it was before. So that's what a nonlinear system is. It's one in which there are feedbacks that change. It's not like there's change on a stable background, but that the changes change the background itself. not dealing with the same landscape each time. Here's another diagram to think about what this is. So one term to describe what we have here is not a stable system, but a metastable system. A metastable system is one. So here in the diagram in the upper right, you can see there's like these kind of, there's a kind of topology there, and there's a little valley. This is that E there is energy. And then the other axis is time. So as energy is, if it remains within a certain range over time, there'll be enough energy to keep that number one ball sort of in a little valley. It's going to change, but back and forth, not anything dramatic. But there is a point at which the linear change, 1 + 1 + 1, will turn to 2, but then it will suddenly drop off, and it will fall to a new sort of energy trough where there's another range of metastability. So we have shifts, sometimes very dramatic, between metastable states. And that's more like what we see in Earth's history and what we're looking at with climatic change. Pretty much every estimate that the IPCC and climate scientists come up with, they're constantly revising. Their estimates are almost always wrong, and they're trying to think non-linearly sometimes about these things. And even then, their estimates of how warm the climate will be is off by a long shot. It's always exponentially worse with every report about what's going to happen. And that's because of all the feedback systems. Okay, so I mentioned already the Gaia hypothesis. There is one thing I want to say about why we live in a metastable system, why this is happening, and that has to do with dissipation. There are very few things that we can say about the entire universe. Everything, first of all, that every law that we know, if we want to think about gravitation or the speed of light, any constant of physics or something, these are not constants in any universal sense. There was a time in this universe where there was no light, there was no gravitation. These constants are relative to the way that our specific universe exploded. It started at a very dense point of energy that was indeterminate, and then it exploded outward, and everything is an emergent property. It came out of that. It didn't have to necessarily, but it did. And one of the things that we can say about this universe that remains constant from the beginning all the way predictably to the very end is entropy. And by entropy, I don't mean necessarily, all I mean is that the universe is spreading from a point of high concentrated energy to low energy. Everything, everywhere is doing that. We don't know of anything that is not following that trajectory. Now, so if the universe is expanding, it is spreading out in all directions through dissipation, which is to say energy is dissipating from a high to a lower state. Metastable states like galaxies and stars, they're temporarily stable. As long as they've got enough energy to keep going, they'll keep going. But eventually they're going to run out. Eventually black holes will swallow up all the galaxies. But for the meantime, those black holes are fueling many of the spiral galaxies patterns and keeping them metastable. So that is one of the reasons. So the dissipation of energy is one of the core things that's the source of these metastable systems. Okay, I talked a little bit about these 100,000-year climatic changes already, but those are metastable systems. So right now we're in a warm period, not just because of the Gaia hypothesis, not just because of human interventions that were destabilizing this stable period, but look at the cycle of erratic rotations of the Earth around the sun. We're just going to get another glaciation period. Like it's inevitable that the climate is going to change really dramatically, whether humans do this or not. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying it's important to recognize that the Earth and the solar system play a really big part in this whole story, in addition to humans. Okay, now this is the big shift. This is the big shift of thinking about the planet. And we're going to get to climate change, I promise, but we have to kind of take some steps to get there first. And the first one is a shift from thinking about conservation to dissipation. This is what the universe is doing. So these are the everywhere things are moving from hot to cold, from concentrated to less concentrated. And this produces some pretty specific patterns. Many of those are what I've called metastable. Many of those are what are called fractal, meaning that they're iterative with a certain distribution that we can measure. That's essentially a dimension between 1 and 2. I mean, that sounds like really crazy and abstract. Like a fractal is just a fractional dimension between dimensions. But dimensions, I don't mean that in any sci-fi way. I mean like 1 dimension line, 2 dimension plane, between the, like, you've never seen a line that's perfect. You've never seen a plane that's perfect. Although a fractal dimension sounds really abstract, there really just only is fractal dimensions of 1 degree or another. But you could talk about a 1.5 dimension, a 1.7. So it's not 1, it's not 2, it's a fraction in between. So anyway, again, that sounds mathematical and abstract, but I mean, you can see this stuff everywhere. So in the bottom left that I have, that's the formation of ice crystals. You can see they've got this dendrite branching pattern. To the next one to the right, that is the distribution of dark matter in the universe. I really have to tell you this. There's so many tangents I could go on, but I do have to share this one tangent, that this particular distribution of dark matter in that second image, NASA loves this. It's on their webpage because they love this story, and you'll see why. That they actually discovered the distribution of dark matter has this pattern, because I mean, it's very hard. You can't see dark matter. I mean, it's not like you just shine a light out there. It's resistant to light. It's not, light does not bounce off of dark matter. So it's very hard to get a sense of where it is. You only know where dark matter is if you know where the baryonic or visible matter is in the universe. And that, you know that by stars. So you can use a telescope, you can look and see where the stars are, but you have to really zoom in to see stars that are very far away. And how do you know where to zoom in? Well, how do you know where's the lines of dark matter that connect all of these pieces of visible matter? And so what the scientists did is they actually used a slime mold. They made a petri dish with agar, and they put down oats, which slime molds love. I bought a slime mold so my kids could play with a pet slime mold for a while. That was fun. But you put down pieces of oats, and then the slime mold, and the slime mold will grow outward in this branching pattern that's fractal, and it will find the oats, and it will find the most efficient way to the oat. It'll send out a lot of branches, but only the branch that finds the oat will be repeated. So, I mean, the slime mold, it's neither a slime nor a mold. It's actually just a bunch of single-celled organisms that work collectively together to find food. And it branches out in this pattern. Okay, my point is, they used the slime mold pattern. They put oats where the stars are, and then where the slime mold connected the stars, that's where on the telescope they looked to see if there were stars that they didn't previously see between the stars that they saw. And that way they were able to trace a line. So they used slime mold to map the distribution of dark matter in the universe, and it turns out that it was accurate. Slime mold patterns produce the same or very similar branching patterns as dark matter in the universe. I just think that's awesome. Same thing with the Tokyo subway system. Sorry, I could go on about slime molds, but they actually they mapped out, they like put a piece of oats where each of the major cities and stations are, and the slime mold reproduced exactly what it took 25 years of Japanese engineers to produce the Japanese railway system that would efficiently connect all the cities together. The slime mold did it in like a day. Anyway, fractals. Okay, so lightning, another really dramatic and visible fractal branching pattern. Why? Because lightning is about energy dissipation. It's going from a high concentration state to a low concentrate. What's the best way to do that? Nobody knows. The Earth doesn't know, lightning doesn't know, but lightning tries. Lightning sends out a whole bunch of branches. You can't see it because it's very fast, but if you ever watch a slow motion of lightning, it branches out and it tries out certain areas, it pulses, and you can watch it move. It moves like a slime mold does. It's very slow. It tries out some directions. No, that wasn't the best way. Tries out another direction. No, that wasn't the best way. And then eventually, so it'll send out all these branches, and the main branch is the one that you'll see with your eye very quickly, one big strike of lightning. But lightning is always really branchy. It's just that it branches out, it tests to see what's the most efficient way to dissipate this energy from a high to low. And then it finds that way, and then that's the lightning strike that you see. And then it'll pulse multiple times, and then even lightning will come up from the ground to meet it. But you don't see that either. Okay, final final picture, which I just recently discovered and I really love. I don't know if you know this, Laaja-alaisessa. Laaja-alaisessa is our local galaxy cluster. So in this image, each one of those little white dots is not a star, it's a galaxy. What you're looking at is a cluster of galaxies. And these lines that you're seeing, these are, I mean, this is pretty recently that that scientists have tracked this. That red dot, that's where we are. Very generally. That's like a whole bunch of galaxies around us and us. But it's branching. Why is the distribution of galaxies branching? Because everything in the universe is branching, because everything is moving from hot to cold. And the two of the very best ways to do that are branching patterns and spirals. Spirals are one of the most efficient ways. That's why when you flush your toilet, it goes straight through a spiral. When you wash your hands in the sink, that's why the water spontaneously organizes itself into a spiral. It's the most optimal way to dissipate energy. That is what the entire cosmos is doing. River deltas there, picture on the left. On the bottom left is a diagram that I drew just to get the idea here across that energy. That's like the inside of an organism. Okay, pick an organism. But that's how I mean, it's with us too. Food comes in through our mouth, and then all of the nerves go through our body and spread out. And most of the energy that we consume, it just radiates as heat off our body, coming out of our head, coming out of our body. We barely use a tenth, or I think it's more like 20% of the energy that we consume. We think that we're so efficient, but nature, is not about conservation. Nature is about dissipation. It's about expenditure. It's about waste. And I know that sounds weird because we have this idea that we're not supposed to be wasting or whatever, but it's waste in the most positive possible way. At every scale, this is what's going on. At the cosmic scale of dark matter down to ice crystals, everything is dissipating this energy and producing these patterns as it does so. So on the right is a diagram. There's lots of data to fill in this diagram, but this is a very loose diagram to get across the idea that I'm trying to tell you right now, is that the vertical axis is total energy. So for instance, the sun has a lot of total energy. It is, however, the rate of energy dissipation. So that's the x-axis there on the bottom. It has a very low. So the lower side would be toward the left. The sun has a very slow rate of dissipation of energy. And that might sound like crazy to you, like how could the sun possibly have a slow rate of energy dissipation? But actually there are bacteria. If you have kids, young children are more efficient at dissipating energy per square area than the sun. I have two small kids, and I think that's definitely true. And they feel that way. I think they're like, yes, I am dissipating energy and enjoying every minute of it, and I cannot sit still. That's a per rate. Okay, so per area they're more efficient. So the sun has a huge surface area, but it's got, it takes 2 million years for a photon to escape the sun. I mean, it takes 8 minutes for it to reach us, but it takes millions of years for it to actually get out of the sun. Now, that's not a very efficient rate of dissipation. Now, if you're a very thin kind of creature, a very thin kind of being, you can really get a lot of dissipation. And life or living organisms are one of the best ways. Okay, so the mineral earth, that's like volcanism, geology, geological movements. Again, the earth has a lot of total energy, but it's not very efficient. Volcanism sounds like, again, it would be very dramatic and would release a lot of energy, but relative to the mass of the earth, it's not that much. The atmosphere is much thinner than the earth, obviously, but insofar as that's the case, per square area, it's a more rapid dissipator. Lightning dissipates a huge amount of energy. There's lightning strikes happening all over the earth. Hundreds of thousands of them, like every minute. Plants and animals, living organisms, the generation of ATP is, from either light or, it's incredible what life can do. It is one of the most efficient dissipators of energy. That's the story. Okay, so here's another diagram, but a branching one, where you can see that minerality, the mineral earth, rocks, and so on, they dissipate energy, but it's highly concentrated. and it doesn't spread out very easily. Atmospherics, plants, vegetables, the plant world, animality, the farther you go down the branching, it's just like a river delta. The farther you go down, the more branches and diversity. For example, there are vastly more animal species than any other species of life. Animals are crazy. They are just really crazy types of creatures on this planet with really diverse and like very tiny little, capillaries and nervous systems. They dissipate so much energy. And one of their secrets is their sheer diversity. It's not their mass. They're a very small portion of mass on the planet. Minerals, atmosphere, plants, that's a big, huge piece of mass. Animals, a very small bit of mass, but relative to their mass, they're extremely diverse, really good dissipators of energy. But this is also a historical line. If that's not already obvious, I should have said that. Minerals, that's the first thing. 4 billion years ago on Earth, minerals are the first. That's what you've got, just a bunch of minerals on the planet. From the mineral Earth, you get. I'm not gonna summarize Earth history here, I promise. But you can. But from the Earth, from the mineral Earth comes the atmospheric Earth. From the atmospheric Earth, then comes the vegetable plant Earth, and then after that, the animals come along. So as humans, we're like really, really late on this entire scene. Okay. On the left, trophic pyramid. If you remember from biology classes back in the day, from high school or maybe even college, I don't know, but at the trophic levels, this is the how energy enters the Earth. At each stage, you have sort of different plants and animals eating one another. But that's not the point of the story. Is not just that animals eat plants and plants make energy from the sun. Yes, yes, yes. The key thing I want to stress here is you see on the right, heat. 9/10 at every level, 9/10 of the energy that's consumed by that level is wasted. That means not reproduced. Not used for the organism itself. Trees, most dramatically, will only retain 1% of all of the energy that they take in. That's just to reproduce the cells and grow a little bit. Everything else is radiated out as transpiration, water, gas. They radiate and waste that at every level. You're wasting it right now. As I said, I mean, it's for most animals, it's 1/10. Humans are slightly a bit more efficient at that level, but we're still wasting, 80-85% of the energy we take in. Now, what does it have to do with evolution and climate change? We're getting there. On the right, the diagram I'm showing here, this is again last 500 million years since the Cambrian. What you can see in this diagram is the evolution of species relative to the rate of energy dissipation. Like how their metabolism, how quickly and efficiently they metabolize energy. You can see that evolutionarily, creatures are evolving and have evolved to increasing degrees of dissipation, of rapid and optimal energy dissipation. They are not about conservation. Evolution, material evolution, from the cosmic to the terrestrial, and definitely at the animal level, is not about conservation. It is about dissipation, accumulating a bunch of energy and wasting the vast majority of it very, very quickly. Now, you might think, well, all that isn't that bad to waste energy and to consume so much? It's not, because we think about it from a human scale, in which the way we do it is completely messed up. We do it by destroying so much. These animals do it by simply increasing the rate by which they do it and sharing it, importantly, with all of the other species around. But we're getting there. Those are the main points. Here's another diagram just to emphasize this very quickly. You can see here, these are, so, there's extinctions that happen, punctuated extinction rates, but the key thing is the red line. Look at the red line. You see that the number of families, okay? So that is within species. What you see is not just an increase in the rate of dissipation, but in like the same amount of species, but not the same amount of species, increasing numbers of families, okay? Within life forms, there are more families. Evolution produces two things: diversity, increasing diversity of species, increasing rates of energy dissipation. These are the two things that I would say evolution is absolutely up to on this planet. Humans cannot just come along and think that they're not part of this story. We are also part of this story. Diversity of both cultural and genetic and all, in every way, the diversity of our species is part of this project, and the increasing rate of energy dissipation. Okay, this is the final thing, and then we'll talk about climate change. This is the thing that really, like, it just really hit me quite hard. I was not expecting to come to this particular conclusion, but I was reading this book, and I highly recommend Into the Cool by Eric Schneider and Dorian Sagan. Dorian Sagan is the son of Carl Sagan. They wrote a book called Into the Cool, in which they have this lovely diagram on the right about trees, and how much, a breakdown of exactly what a tree is doing, right? How much energy is it taking in? How much energy is it using, and how much is it dissipating? And I'm going to read you the following paragraph. It's a little technical, but it's important to read it and understand what's going on here, because the implications are pretty significant, and I want you to see how I got there. The transpiration of water through trees, for example, requires about 580 calories per gram of water transpired. So transpiration is the movement of water out of the ground, through the tree, into the air. That's what makes the atmosphere, and so on. A single tree transpiring 100 kilograms of water a day will use nearly 60 million calories. If the average tree evaporates 151,600 kilograms of water a year, that's nearly 88 billion calories per tree per year. Okay, multiplied by 3 trillion trees. So this is, I mean, this is a very recent discovery that we know there's the 3 trillion trees on the planet, only because of 2012 or something, satellites that have got a global picture of the planet have tried to estimate the number of trees. And, you know, previously scientists were like, well, there's probably billions of trees on the planet. We don't know how many. It's kind of hard to count that kind of thing. The satellites have shown there are not billions of trees. There are trillions of trees, 3 trillion trees. It sounds like an insane amount of trees on the planet, but I have to tell you that there used to be twice that much. If 3 trillion trees sounds like a lot, at the beginning of the Holocene, there were 6 trillion. Over the course of human history, humans have reduced the number of trees on the planet by half. That's a lot of tree removal. So multiplied by 3 trillion trees currently, that results in an incredible 1.1 times 10 to the 24th joules of energy a year. Okay, that number probably means nothing to you. It meant nothing to me the first time I read it. That is 1.1 with 24 zeros after it. Okay, it's like billions or trillions. No, that's not like the right vocabulary to talk about the number of joules here. 24 zeros is called a yotta-joule. Yotta is 24 zeros. Okay, maybe you don't care, but I will just tell you that that is an enormous amount of energy compared to everything else on the planet. Everything else on the planet really pales in comparison with how much energy trees generate. And this is in part because, take a look at this diagram. Plants, 83% of the biomass on this planet is plants. That is huge. We are a plant planet. This is the vast majority of what's going on the surface of this planet is plants, trees, doing whatever they're doing. That's part of the reason why their energy expenditure is really dramatic compared to everything else. Bacteria, enormous amount of bacteria on the planet. Fungi, way more fungi certainly than even animals, right? Animals are 0.4% of the biomass. There's way more fungi on the planet, way more bacteria. Humans, 0.01% of biomass. We are a very tiny little bit of biomass with a very big impact on that other big piece, that 83% of plants that we're destroying, including fungi and bacteria we're destroying too, and obviously animals. And anyway, we're having a disproportionate impact, destructive on the planet. What does that mean? This is okay. We could calculate all the details here. I have some of those numbers. These are the big numbers here. This is a graph showing over the past 4,000 years the decrease in phytomass. So plants, trees, and this is according to the data, the energy researcher Vaclav Smil. I don't know. If you've heard of this guy, he just came out with a book, like a trade book, but he's been writing books for just decades now studying energy, but he's one of the few people who's out there counting these kinds of energy totals. But in this case, it's very important because it's going to bring us to a conclusion that is quite, for me at least, it was very surprising. This is, so these are phytomass totals. What it shows here is that over the course of 4,000 years, so that's roughly like, the Neolithic to the present in human history, humans from the Neolithic to the present have reduced the amount of phytomass by half on the planet. Okay, that's just to say the trees just didn't die. Half the trees on the planet, if they're the ones generating all this energy, we have halved their numbers. You know this one. This is the hockey stick diagram that everybody sees and talks about with climate change. This is energy, but you see that I've changed the numbering of it, but you can see roughly the arc is that since the 19th century, the rise of industrialization, the usage of energy, human energy expenditure has really gone up, exponentially up, and it keeps going up. Last 30 years are absolutely crazy years of energy expenditure. And that's usually what people talk about when they say, oh, humans are using too much energy and, just this exponential growth and we can't sustain this and we're using too much on the planet, we need to conserve. The numbers I've put on here look very, very tiny, right? 0.000065 is a very small number. That's because I've calculated it in terms of yotta-joules. Human expenditure is very, very tiny compared to the expenditure of trees on the planet. And I'm not doing this to say, oh, humans don't have any impact. Obviously, humans have impact. It's just not related, or it's not the same as their energy expenditure. They don't really have an overall energy expenditure that's significant. What they do is they do other things that are very significant, but just it's not their expenditure of energy that's significant. This is now the final diagram before the conclusion about the sort of ethical consequences of all of this. You can see the top part, that is a line, that's that reduction of at the scale of yotta-joules, 2.4 to 1.1 decrease in total planetary expenditure. That is if we calculate it, and again, the numbers might be very slightly different because we're dealing with all kinds of things that expend energy on the planet, but the largest energy expenditures by far are trees. By halving the amount of trees, we've halved the total energy expenditure of the planet. The planet is using less energy than it was, at the beginning of the Holocene. We've slowed that process down, even though I recognize that today it feels like things are moving. They certainly are moving at our scale faster than they ever have before. But there's this very weird kind of dissonance between the planetary reduction of energy and the visible moving around of various objects. But they are related because the destabilization, the moving around of shipping containers and human people and animals and plants and moving all of these things around the world so rapidly actually results in a decrease in planetary expenditure. At the bottom scale, you can see that human energy expenditure from the industrialization to the present is negligible. It's not even registerable on the scale of yotta-joules, okay? Because this is just showing you that human energy expenditure itself, the expenditure is not the problem. The problem is the destruction, is that humans have intervened into the planetary system of expenditure. The whole point, remember, of the universe is to dissipate energy. That's what produces stability. If you want stability, this is the thesis here, okay? Certain human groups have expanded energy as if the Earth were stable and not metastable. This has increasingly destabilized it. By destroying the systems of dissipation, because again, this is often how humans think, historically, I should say really Western humans have thought about this problem is nature is stupid, nature's wasteful, nature just squanders all of this stuff. And the same things were said about, European things, same things European colonists said about indigenous people everywhere was they're wasting all of this nature. All of these resources are being wasted by these indigenous people. We should go there and help these people, like we Europeans, right, should go and help these people from wasting nature and wasting their own lives, civilize them, civilize nature, because it's wasteful. Now, this is like a completely wrong way to think about what humans are doing in the cosmos. The cosmos is about expenditure. It is about waste. That is what's going on. And we can either fight it and pretend like that's not happening and end up killing ourselves on the planet, or we can go with it and realize that the whole point is actually to increase diversity of species, cultures, peoples, everything, and increase expenditure by sharing our waste with the world. Okay, so now we're getting to some of the consequences here ethically. The point here is not, if we want to be ethical, if we want to respond to our real cosmic situation on the planet, we cannot be about energy conservation or reducing energy. That's not the point. The point is actually to increase planetary energy. Now, that might require a reduction of human energy, but we cannot think about this at the level of humans any longer. We need to think about this at the level of the planet itself and the cosmos itself. The goal there, the most stable systems are the most wasteful systems. That's why the Milky Way is so stable. It's a giant spiral. It's a giant vortex being sucked into a black hole. Yes, it's destructive, but it's the destruction in the right way that shares it with everything else and lets all of those things move and mix together, that produces all of the stars and planets, in the galaxy. Okay, so this is our current problem. Even though I know this is a provocative way to put this here, but we need to help the entire planet dissipate by sort of giving it the gift of death, to help everything die. And by die, of course, I mean live, because you can't die unless you're alive. So part of sharing and dissipating that energy is to share death, to sort of embrace the dissipation in a healthy way instead of fighting it. How do we do that? How do we increase planetary dissipation? There's a million ways we could talk about. I think some of them go also, sometimes people call them conservation. I don't think they're actually about conservation really energetically at the planetary scale, but here's some. One is compost. Compost everything in the broadest sense. Like, everything needs to break down, and when it dies, its death needs to be, it give life to other things. Right now, we're in a completely opposite situation where we are burying our trash in landfills that don't have access to bacteria. We are reducing planetary bacteria levels and fungus levels by not allowing them to get into our trash. Like, we have made by making things out of styrofoam and plastic that are really hard to break down. I mean, they will eventually on the geological scale. That's not the point. Temporarily, we are reducing the levels of bacteria and fungus and trees and plants by deforesting and landfills. So carbon sequestration in the broadest possible sense. I just read an article, it was a couple years old, but it was a climate scientist basically saying, like, all this geoengineering stuff is like, it's speculative, it's highly unlikely to work, it could have very dangerous consequences. There already exists a technology 300 million years in the making that can solve this problem. And it has stabilized the Holocene for a very long time. They're called trees. We have enough room on this planet right now to replant enough trees that would push back climate change 25 years, according to the article. It's a completely doable thing. And I don't mean planting like oil palm trees, right? I mean like real trees that produce ecosystems that sustain real diverse populations. It's not just about the trees. It's about what trees provide also all of these other subtropic levels inside of forests. So this is the other thing, these are 2 points. One, compost everything. That involves sequestration. It involves allowing all these other organisms to exist, and increasing species diversity, or just also cultural diversity. Every kind of diversity, material diversity at every level, that's what increases dissipation. It means at every stage, it's not just like there's one kind of dissipator, is that it filters through every level, many, many levels of dissipators. Little creatures, little plants that can get into every nook and cranny on the planet. Different cultures, it's best to have a really wide array of different cultural habits, not just because like cultural diversity is important. It's also important at the planetary and cosmic scale of ways of living, ways of knowing, ways of thinking. The more ways we have of being in the world, the more energy we're going to dissipate, because the more ways we're going to behave. It's about the diversity of behaviors, not the right or wrong behaviors, but about a range of diverse behaviors that are going to participate in the larger planetary process. And I just have to share, this is it, final quote, promise. Oh, my clock disappeared, so I don't know how I'm doing in time. I'm sorry if I've gone over, but final quote, another Bataille quote for the dancers, because this was the other quote I saw by Bataille that I just really loved, and like just, I don't know, put things really in perspective for me. Even though Bataille doesn't go through all the stuff I was saying, again, he just kind of throws these things out, and you either know where he's coming from or you don't. But he says, through loss, man, of course, we should probably say humans here, can regain the free movement of the universe. He can dance and swirl in the full rapture of those great swarms of stars, but must, in the violent expenditure of self, perceive that he breathes in the power of death. And Bataille's not trying to be macabre, but, he's not trying to, like, I don't know, think like death, oh, we're all going to die. It's not about that. Like that, to rethink the whole relationship of life and death. Again, this is not like new to Bataille. It's just my entry point into it. A lot of humans on this planet have said very similar things just like this. But he does have this very poetic way of saying it, that, for humans to reorient themselves to what the rest of the universe is doing. Historically, Europeans and the West have been fighting against fighting against death. They want to live forever. They want to go to heaven. They want to have things exactly. They want to be memorialized on the planet. They want to know things that are universal and unchanging. They want something that just doesn't exist. And their drive to achieve that, colonization, universal epistemologies, it's just resulted in climate and human devastation at every scale. And I think that a very general way forward is just completely reframe the situation. Okay, thanks.
Whoa, thank you. That was a lot. Yeah, well, if you have some questions in the online space or here in the gallery space, you can either ask them yourself or type it down, or hand me a note and I can ask and translate if there is anything in Finnish that you would like to ask. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, and I find that kind of like trying to like switch away from like these eternal truths and this aspiration towards like something that stays and is like stable and universally like real, into like this constantly moving and branching and experimental way of seeing yourself and the universe. And I don't know, it's a lot. It takes a while to switch it.
Yeah, it does. But it took me a couple. I mean, I have to say, when I read that stuff about the trees, I was like, what? This is crazy. It was not the way I was thinking about things, but the book, just starting where I started, led me down a path that ended up coming to a really different place. And I thought, this can't be right. Like, I've got to have, I don't know, maybe I messed up thinking about this. So I just started talking to, my friends in, in biology and mathematics. So like, no, I'm like, did I calculate this right? Is this actually what's going on? They're like, yeah, that's actually going on. If this is true about transpiration and energy use, that's what's going on. I mean, the stuff about the planet, the cosmos more broadly, that was more, I don't know, it felt a bit more distant. But when it came to the planet, I just hadn't thought about it in that way. But Bataille helped me along to come to this conclusion. And I do think it changes really a lot the way that we think about our place on the planet, just what we're even aspiring to as human beings, what the universe is even aspiring to. It doesn't know. The universe isn't doing anything deterministic. It doesn't have to do this stuff. It's experimenting just like we are. Evolution, same thing. We're part of that experiment. It's weird to think about. Here's another crazy idea that's completely consistent with the theory of evolution, but is very weird to wrap your mind around, is that there won't be in the future, there's no reason to believe that Homo sapiens will continue on the planet, they'll evolve into other Homo species. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there will be other hominids that will be like us, like we're like, primates. Like the future humans will be to us as we are to primates. But that is totally not the way that we think about it. We think we're the end of evolutionary history, but that's ridiculous. There's nothing to suggest that that would be the case. Other hominids will evolve and they will look back at us and as like pre thems, like, oh, this is what we used to be like before we evolved into this other thing. And there will be further creatures that will evolve after whatever those hominids, or if they're even called that at that point. It's just a weird idea to think about, but it just shows you that like whatever we call human knowledge is, I don't know, there's another great Nietzsche quote I'm not remembering, but just that, he has this idea that like, he says like once upon a time, there was this, this planet where these clever humans invented this thing called knowledge. And then the universe took a deep breath and then the clever humans had to die. And that's what Nietzsche says about like, this is a better way to think about our relationship to knowledge and epistemology, is that like everything we've ever recorded in civilization will be gone. No one will remember these things. There will be traces left of our bones and our whatever in the earth, in our geology, but our knowledge will be gone. No one will ever know the things that we've known. And certainly there's nothing universal about the way that we knew them that other creatures and other planets wouldn't, have their own ways of knowing things. And then they themselves die. Like it just puts in context the real situation, the material cosmic evolutionary situation of what we typically call knowledge, or anything, or art or science or philosophy, what we're even doing when we're doing this stuff. The key thing is that we are doing, and that's my perspective, is energetic. Like we are doing something, and it's important to realize that there's an energetic level at which we are moving, performing, reproducing, destroying in a very fractal way. I mean, I gave all those examples. I should have put in a city, because if you look at a city from a map, it's totally fractal. Almost every major city has these branching tendrils, just like a fractal. It's because it's very organic. It just kind of grows as populations grow and so on. Anyway, I won't get started on urban planning, but
yeah, there was a comment. Thank you. What could this mean in terms of art processes and especially aesthetics? Conservative art practices suddenly seem even more weird and off. Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a whole other talk. Actually, I'll try to answer it, but I'll just say I have given talks that are just about new materialist and aesthetics. And it kind of, it would take a little bit to frame, for you what has been said about aesthetics, what the problems are with that, and where new materialism as a kind of philosophical perspective, a very kind of European one, is trying to challenge those old ways. One of those I would say is about, it's hard to answer the question without saying a little bit about what aesthetics is often treated as in the history of, like, what is even called aesthetics and what we're talking about now and how different it is. I'm going to just give two really big figures in there. One is Plato, the other is Kant. For Plato, aesthetics it's basically you're playing with forms, but you never will get at the true forms. Those are only accessible through contemplation. The forms are unchanging, perfect, beautiful, true. Art is always headed in the wrong direction for Plato. Art is only going to be error. And you really need to stop doing art and stop looking at art or doing it because it's confusing you, and you're never going to know what's real and unchanging and true and static. And for that, I mean, that's actually a bonus here. That vision actually makes art, which I think it is, much closer to the truth than philosophy has ever been. That division between poetry, for example, mythology and philosophy, poetry and philosophy at the very core of the Western tradition. That is what happened, is we really overcame it. And one of the consequences is that aesthetics historically lost. I mean, I'm not saying aesthetics lost and like it's not important anymore. I'm just saying in the history of Western thinking, art has often taken a backseat to philosophy and science as the holders of real truth. And art is often seen epistemologically as basically unrelated to knowledge. right? You just don't know anything if you're doing that. Art is not a way to know the world. Art is just like something that looks nice and you feel good. Like, what does that have to do with the cosmos? My answer, everything. That is just what the cosmos is doing. The cosmos, from that Bataille quote, the cosmos is itself a work of art. That's what it is. That's what's really going on. And the philosophers like Plato, who are like, oh, but that doesn't have anything to do with universal truths. That's right, because there are not universal truths, because you live in a cosmos which is exploding and you have no idea, Plato. He had no idea. He was wrong about pretty much every scientific prediction, wrong about optics, wrong about the cosmos. He never said a single thing that was like factually right, verified in any way by anything we know experimentally now. Other philosophers did get some more things right, but Plato is really dramatically wrong. And it's partly because he comes from this completely, universalistic kind of perspective. In any case, Plato's way off, but that puts aesthetics, in my mind, back to the foreground. It puts philosophy and science into the background as making historically in the Western tradition some major errors. And it brings aesthetics to the foreground as being what it has always been about. Real, like performance, movement, activity, sensation. That is what our bodies are doing. Think about for just a moment. Sorry, I'm going off. I'll stop here. But I have to say one thing about the nervous system. Human nervous systems are really incredible. Like evolutionarily speaking, they are super branchy, fractal, filled. We use so much energy just to keep these things going. We are massive energy wasters. And one way to do that, and like one thing we can do with all of these sensitive nerves, right, is that's what art is. It is the play of those sensations in our bodies that give us a feeling. I'm not saying it's always good. Sometimes it's bad, but that's a feeling too, right? Stimulating those senses and playing with all the ways one can feel one's body in the world. That is what the universe is about. It's about playing with those things. That's what even evolution is pushing at. It's about play and experimentation at the very fringes of entropic dissipation, of places where there are gradients that can be broken down. And art is, I think, historically more interested in, like I think in the European tradition, but certainly in non-Europeans and even like pre-civilization traditions, really interested in experimenting in a much more playful way than, unfortunately, like, I don't know, a lot of European representational art. And so like it's too caught up with trying to be something that's not natural, against nature. I just looked at some land art the other day. I'm forgetting who it was, but this artist did this crazy installation in the middle of the desert where he built this giant cement monolith. And it just really, I just don't like this. Like, I did not like this piece of earth art. Earth art is cool. I like it. It's an interesting thing, much of it. But this was just, it struck me as this like modernist giant monolith. Like, we are not part of nature. We can make right angles, geometric forms that are like perfect, and we will put them in the middle of an ecosystem, like as a contrast, to what humans can do. So anyway, this idea that like European and Western art is like really different and cut off from nature, I think that's been a drag for us. That we're somehow not part of the cosmos, that we're freaks even, and that's still part of the Platonic narrative. And even later, further with Kant, that was the other big figure I was going to mention. But for Kant, he's not interested in eternal and changing forms out in the world. He's interested in like eternal and changing forms in our minds. There's a structure that's fixed, ahistorical and universal in our consciousness. And for the same reasons, like, that's alienates human beings from the rest of the world to say that, like, we're not part of the world. Oh, we have no idea. Kant's like, we don't know what the world's actually like. I think that's just completely wrong. We are the world. Like, how could we not know what it was? We are it, I'm not saying we know everything. I'm just saying we have something that's real. It's not just in our heads. It's not just subjective. We are really, when we make art, we are making the cosmos. We are participating in the evolutionary project at a material level. That, again, biologists can be like, art is not evolution. Like, evolution is art. Like, evolution is artistic. It is aesthetic, because it's experimental, it's playful, it's pushing on all those boundaries. It's trying to be different, actively trying to be different. Whereas often it feels in science the goal is to like reduce everything to the same, to one law or two laws or one field or something. We can reduce and explain everything by just a couple simple things. Whereas, the other end of that is, no, let's just see how different it could possibly be. right? And there's a little bit science in its best ways is more interested in how different things could be, where things break down and where there are errors and what's not explained. I think that drives scientific motivation, but the quest often is to then capture that different thing and then like explain it by some new universal law. Whereas I think aesthetics is less interested in that. But again, this connects aesthetics to a deeper, older tradition before the divisions between science and art and philosophy or whatever, back to, archaic cultures and prehistoric cultures that they're not invested in the same kind of, oh, here's religion and this is art and this is politics and whatever. For them, those things were much more entangled with each other. They were all wrapped up. Now I've really gone on too long. I'm going to stop for other questions if there are them.
Yeah. You can come here to ask if you want in English or sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Thanks for the talk. It's really cool. I was wondering, you were saying earlier how knowledge is going to be gone and all that stuff, and I guess that's profoundly true. And I was wondering, how there's this kind of perspective that everything, instead of being physically modeled as we kind of model the universe and biology and everything else, is kind of based on, let's say, an information theory perspective, right? So it's all information. All we are an encoding of some way of dissipating energy, and there are more and more efficient ways of doing that. And from that perspective, one can say then everything we think of is encoded in that model as well, and then that encoding becomes integrated if it's part of the model that's more efficient and more optimal. And then in that way, that's preserved. I mean, I don't know how that sits with what you're saying, but does that make any sense in that, your theory?
Yeah, totally. So I would say two things about information theory. One is I know what you're talking about. I'm not sure if information in its most simple form would just be 1 and 0, a binary system in which you could discretize something about the world. And I think from a quantum perspective, that's just not experimentally what we see. What we see at the experimental level in quantum physics, so I'm not like importing any theories here. I'm just saying at the experimental level, we have a deep indeterminacy about what energy can do. Which state is energy in, 1 or 0? The whole point, the big discovery of quantum physics was that it's indeterminate. Observation influences what state that energy is in, 1 or 0. Okay, now you can make anything 1 or 0 if you want to, but that's something that humans kind of attribute or measure or discretize in the world. There's not naturally 1s or 0s or states that we could call information. So one, as I would say, at the smallest scale, you're dealing with quantum fluctuations that are indeterminate, meaning that they are neither 1 nor 0. So to me, that means you can use information and information theory for predictive models with some success, for sure. But it's not an accurate ontological description of what's going on at the smallest scales of energy. At the macroscopic scale, you said like more and more efficient ways. So yes, the universe is spreading out and it tends to find itself in very efficient metastable patterns like branches and spirals and webs and things like that are very good at distributing energy. Very optimal, I should say. They're not always maximal, because if everything just exploded instantly, that would be really dramatic and maximal. But optimal is like you've got some metastability going on. But here's the thing is the universe doesn't know ahead of time what the best ways to dissipate energy is. So it's not something that we could calculate and figure out, okay, what's the best way? Like knowing what we know now about the cosmos, what's the most efficient way for it to dissipate energy? We don't know because it doesn't know. We could make some guesses. I'm not saying we couldn't make some pretty good guesses based on what we've seen so far. What I would say is that fundamentally, we don't know what the universe will do. We don't know what kinds of patterns it's capable of. We don't know what kinds of laws, regional laws. So for instance, I mean, we only know about 1/200th of the universe. It's a little dramatic to say really big things about what the universe is doing, even if we're talking about information or the 14 fundamental quantum fields, like, the weak nuclear, whatever we want to say about these fields. These are emergent properties. even space-time itself is an emergent property. It might look really different in different areas of the universe. Okay, this is speculative. We don't know, but it's important to say we don't know. And because we don't know, and we fundamentally can't know, because the universe is producing emergent patterns, we will never know, and the universe will have to experiment. It'll have to try it out. What do these laws look like? What do these fields look like? What does space-time look like if I try it like this, right? Does this work? And, I'm not saying this is like some cognitive process of the universe. I'm just saying the things that work mean they produce metastable patterns are the ones that dissipate energy in an optimal way, rapid and stable, metastable. Anyway, that's just to say that I agree with what you're saying, but there's two qualifications about that have to do with quantum physics.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I guess so I'm trying to figure out it's really interesting points. I'm not sure if you answered my question. So you said, I'm trying to figure out what my question is now. So
yeah,
agree,
remind me of your question.
Well, on a fundamental level, I agree that, you can nail down energy, right? 1 or 0. I guess that's a really good point. But as seeing it as an emergent property, then there's some point where we can then say, this is definitely one or other, whether it's an observer or not. Let's say DNA at that level, molecular level, you're at a point where, boom, you have that particular thing, right? So at some point, you can say it's 1 or 0, and at that point, maybe that's where the information begins, right? And I don't know where the universe is going, where it's taking things to, but maybe that's not critical, because when you do have the information nailed down, then at that point, as you're evolving, what direction you're evolving, and you're accumulating knowledge in whatever way you are, to find whatever path that may be optimal or not, that is encoded, right? And that encoding may then live on. And just because the point you said earlier about how all that's going to be gone, I guess it'll be gone in the form that we're familiar with, but there's something that we contribute to that stays on. And in a maybe poetic way, you can say that, that's, way back, is traced back to my poem or whatever, junk.
Yeah.
Down the line, it's still there, right? So I guess that was what I was trying to ask about, what you thought about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So actually this leads to, you're asking a kind of terrestrial question, but let me just push it a bit farther and say, no, I mean, it's fine. Like, I agree with everything you're saying at the terrestrial level, but let me just push it a bit farther and say that, like, eventually everything in this galaxy will be swallowed by a supermassive black hole at the center of it. And eventually that supermassive black hole will be swallowed by another supermassive black hole, until the whole universe, because supermassive black holes are really good metastable energy optimal dissipators. They will suck in everything and they will break it down until its very tiniest energetic components, and then they will slowly release those. So black holes do radiate energy. So this was Stephen Hawking's discovery, and anyway, there's a whole area called the black hole information paradox. Again, my personal perspective, like I don't think thinking about things in terms of information from my perspective is quite helpful. It's going to take too long to say. Well, I see where you're coming from, and it's good as a heuristic, but philosophically, it's not my preferred terminology, because I don't think anything is ever nailed down. I'm a process philosopher, so for me, everything is process, and discrete ones or zeros are not, there's no such thing. Like, I don't even believe that they exist. I don't think there is any one. I don't think there is any zero. I think there are processes that produce metastable states like an eddy, but we call them one. I'm saying we can call anything we want one, go crazy. That's what I think information is. It just calls stuff ones and zeros in order to make some predictions, and you get some things right sometimes. You can do that, but it doesn't mean that's actually what's going on. It just means it's functional for whatever reason. We're not really sure why that works. Even ontologically, it's not true, but things are stable. When things are stable enough, it works. But the answer to your question is, like at the cosmic scale, right? Is any of this retained? It's not retained in any recognizable form. Like, we're never going to find a piece of poetry out of a black hole. It's going to have broken down, but something, I would say this though, that something of, not the exact replication of, but something of us, something of our works, of what we've done, it never goes away. It leaves a trace. I think that's how I would put it. It would leave a trace on the universe that would not be erased. And that's the information paradox of the black hole. Is people don't like the idea that the information the world would be totally erased. Because it can't just go to nowhere. And that's one of the, that's the first law of thermodynamics. Energy is not created or destroyed. Black holes can't destroy energy. That's impossible. So there's a paradox. I won't get into the paradox. I'll just say my position on the paradox is that a trace is retained, that something of our universe, of some kind of our lives, is retained, even at the very end when all of the universe has been completely broken down. Something of us has been retained, even if it's no longer recognizable. It's left a mark.
Great, thank you.
I like your shirt. Cuphead. Is that a Cuphead shirt? Is that a Cuphead shirt?
Yeah,
your
it
shirt.
is. It is.
Yeah.
Correct.
I like it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you so much. This was really inspiring talk. Oh, there were still some. So yes, also socially and social, in terms of maybe shifting from conservation of agency and power to dissipation or reorientation or movement. Maybe shifting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question, but
yeah, maybe it's
I'm happy. I'm happy to say that there's real, at the social scale, there's lots of political implications for what I'm saying as well. I mean, they're maybe not as specific as you might like, because I don't know, for me, I think of politics really as very experimental, and very singular, like more like art than I think we often think about politics as like ideologies, or like having the right idea and having the wrong idea and doing the right thing or the wrong thing. I'm not really sure there is a right or wrong thing. Like there's just really singular people in singular places trying to live. And it's always a struggle. I guess I'm very like cautious not to say too much about what kind of society would result, or what kind of social change would exactly happen, because it's not up to me. I don't want to prognosticate on what we ought to do. It's just not my place. I don't think nature doesn't give us any oughts in the universe. I'm just saying, I suppose the political takeaway here, there's lots of negative things to say, which is there's lots of things that don't fit with the story I've told. One of those is capitalism. Just out of the gate, nothing about capitalism as a description of reality, as a behavior on the planet. It's completely suicidal. Socially, it's just planetary suicide. The whole framework is modeled on exchange. It's ridiculous. Like, energetically speaking, what do you mean exchange equal? Like equality of exchange? There's no equality of exchange. There's always loss. There's just constant waste and asymmetry and singularity. Like, to exchange things for money is absurd at the cosmic level. I'm not saying, we can do it, we can pretend, but let's just admit, we're just making up a game that's got nothing to do with the world. The way that nature actually works, that anything around us, we do not see anything else in nature participating in an equality of exchange. Most of human history is not even engaged in equality of exchange. People do move objects around, but when you look at different, there's no equality of those exchanges. So David Graeber's book on debt, he has some good, there's no anthropological evidence for cultures historically that have engaged in like barter and trade. That's like a fantasy of like Europeans who imagine that, so-called primitive peoples did that, before they knew about equality of exchange. But it's rubbish. Like, there's always an asymmetry. There's a qualitative change when you give somebody something as a gift, and then maybe they give you something back, right? Maybe what they give you is really different, because it's going to be different and it's going to have a different meaning attached to it. In any case, I'm thinking of Marcel Mauss and things too, of the asymmetry of the gift. There's never an equality. There's always a disequilibrium. And that's what we do. That's what we do see in the rest of energy exchanges and the rest of the planet. There's always energy loss. Nothing is equally returned. Everything is wasted to some degree. It's broken down. You can't ever equally exchange anything with anybody. So capitalism as a description of reality is completely false. It's based on nothing that we know experimentally or observationally about the world works like capitalism does. and yet we keep doing it, and we're shocked to see that it's destroying the world. I mean, like, anyway, I could go on about politics. I say there's lots of negative things to say about things that don't fit, but positively, I think the key idea here is imagination, like social and political imagination. We have to be more creative and more diverse in what we're doing, and that all is going to look really different in different places with different people. And that's about all I can say, is we got to fuss it out. I don't know if that was a question from the person, but that's my 2 cents on the social and political consequences of this idea.
Yeah, thank you. I at least feel really inspired, and it's like, so yeah, I don't know, there is something counterintuitive with like making yourself face death and wastefulness, and then it kind of like frees yourself to like create and be more alive. In a way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So
go with
I
the
really
flow.
appreciate
Yeah.
this. Yeah. But thank you. If there is not anything more, maybe we can just say thank you and have a beautiful Saturday morning. Is it still morning there? Maybe.
Yeah.
So we are heading towards the night here. And yeah, thank you so much. And
thank you, everybody. Yeah, thanks for your questions, and thanks for attending. And thank you again, Taro and the collective, for my work and inviting. I really appreciate it. It was great speaking with you all.
Yes, thank you. Yes, okay. Bye.
Bye.